today we had our first CIPR social media panel hack day, which sounds like a bit of a mouthful, but what we've done is we've taken the old way of working. So instead of coming together once every 6 weeks to look at actions and talk about things that we've done and plan for kind of the next 6 weeks, we're actually making it more agile and real time. So we're getting everybody to meet once every 2 months for half a day to talk about a topic and then to produce content on that topic for you guys, members of the CIPR and the wider PR profession. This week's topic, this month's topic, is paid for social media content. So today we've talked about everything from promoted tweets to display ads to Google ads and how do they fit into campaigns, and what are the skill sets that people need to actually make their campaigns better, more effective, and to hit their targets and KPIs. So we've just got a few questions that I'll ask you about the session today, because you were in it all the way through, and then we'll put this out there, and if you guys have any comments or questions, then please do come back to us and we'd be more than happy to answer them. So first of all, why are we even talking about paid for social?
So 2015 has been billed the year that Facebook organic reach fell to 0. We now know as well that Twitter followers receive on average about 3% of your content. So really, organic reach has died across social. So it's now up to PRs or whoever is managing those channels, which quite often is PRs, to look at how they can still get that message out to the audience. So paid for solutions from Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn allow you to boost your content. So it isn't a question of you necessarily, although you can, but not necessarily. You don't have to create an ad in a traditional way that other people might think about. This is actually about taking the content that you've produced already and that you know that works for your audience and that you've carefully crafted and put all your blood, sweat and tears into, but giving it the audience it deserves.
Fantastic. So I think that was a key message for me. It's the amplification of organic content. So it isn't about radically changing the way that we are working. There might be some PR campaigns that would just benefit from promoting the content further. So you might want to promote some good coverage that you've had or some opinion pieces that you've generated using things like promoted tweets or organic Facebook posts.
Exactly. And you know, it's just the same, say, with YouTube. If you've got some brilliant content that you want to get out there, you upload it, you might then typically share it with bloggers, influencers, journalists to try and gain some views on it. But actually, if you put a little bit of budget behind it as well, that can really help it to get that kickstart on the views, and then it can take off. There's no point creating all this beautifully crafted content if nobody's then going to see it.
Brilliant. So we've got, that's one aspect of paid for content or paid for social media. What else kind of comes under that bracket?
So, I mean, paid for content is a massive thing, which we weren't going to be able to do in one day. And also, as the social media panel, we felt it was more key to focus on social. So, I mean, paid social has loads of different facets. One of the things that we were talking about is the amplification, so the element of boosting posts, promoting tweets, sponsoring updates on LinkedIn. But, you know, there are other things that you can do as well. So you might, for instance, give a blogger a product to review, which they might be then seen as a sponsored post. Or even going further down that line, if you're using a YouTube talent or a Vine talent, any kind of social talent really, and they're creating content which you've commissioned or given them money for, and then they're posting it to their audience, that's still paid for content as well.
So we talked about amplification. What about things like media partnerships? Do they still come under the banner of paid for content?
I mean, they can do so. I mean, media partnerships, again, is such a broad spectrum in its own right, whether it's the fact that you're commissioning content with them or you're producing content which is going in sort of native advertising. But often when these are brokered, there's an element of being able to perhaps negotiate around sharing on social channels, or, you know, utilising some of their channels or getting some of your content shared on there. So what I'd say to PRs is to try and integrate with their media teams. If they're brokering these partnerships, which might have perhaps been more marketing-led, and wouldn't necessarily have considered the PR campaigns that you're doing, is to integrate within that team so you can see what the opportunities are and make sure that you can perhaps get an assist with your KPIs, which wouldn't really cost any more budget necessarily.
It's a really interesting point about native advertising and sponsored content and looking at the national newspapers and how they're approaching that as well. So at a future PR event that we were at last week, or that we held last week, we had Matt Keynes from The Guardian talking about native advertising and sponsored content and what to do on that section. And he was saying about the different skill sets needed from both journalists and PRs to broker these relationships, and then to negotiate on the type of content so that they're seen as editorial and they're of interest to the readers, but obviously they're clearly labelled that they're promoted or sponsored and disclosed as paid for. And I think different publications have different words to use the fact that they're sponsored. So I think one of the things also that we would urge everyone to do is to look out for those guidelines on the national newspapers and to understand how they work in that context, and how then they fall into the campaign. So how does all of that differ from display ads? Because traditionally PR people might see display ads as a kind of digital marketing agency's role, and how does that now come into play?
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult because, I mean, I guess if you're sort of looking at it from maybe a more traditional viewpoint, you're seeing all these metrics of cost per click or cost per engagement, and you're sort of thinking, well, that isn't really my bag, that isn't something I've needed to look at before. And what I'd say is that social advertising is a broad spectrum. So yeah, it does have the kind of display metrics, the display capability. But I think what we were talking about today is really how can you maximize the impact of your earned content. So if you are doing Facebook posts already, you are doing Twitter posts, it's more about getting that more reach and more awareness and visibility, because if you're creating this fabulous content but nobody sees it, there's no point in you creating it. So I think what we were talking about is it doesn't need to be a big boys game. You don't need 50 grand in the bank to be able to do it. What you can do is, if you're running these social channels already, maybe just invest maybe say 100 quid or even less than that, and try a few different variations on the platforms and see what kind of results you get. And from that you can then take those insights to maybe invest a bit more in the future. So yeah, I think definitely people try it and see what you think.
So the State of the Profession survey came out today by the CIPR, and there were a few interesting findings in that. How does that play into paid for side of things?
So I think what was quite scary actually is from the State of the Profession survey that 64% of people, PR professionals, not just random people, 64% of PR professionals actually came back and said the traditional skills, so copywriting, interpersonal skills, were what they saw as the key competencies, which is fine. I can see how written skills are still really relevant, and the rest of it is as well. But actually, only 20% said that technical skills and the digital skills were really key competencies that were more relevant to them. And I think what's happening now is we're seeing such a big change in the world and how much PR can impact SEO, and now we're seeing that how paid can potentially impact our earned efforts. So I think it's really about making sure that the people in your team have this understanding and this knowledge.
Which kind of brings me on to my final question, I suppose. Yeah. So what's the one thing that people should take away or go and look up or read about?
Yeah, so I think key things to take away is that if you're already using these social channels for a very small amount of money, I mean, even sort of 20 quid, £10, you could have a little trial and have a dabble. So don't be scared of it, especially if you have a test account, or maybe even with Twitter, you can do it on your own. So actually have like a little go on that. And number two, I know you only said one, but I'd say integrate. So if you're working on clients that perhaps have a media agency, talk to them about the kind of deals that they're brokering. And also if they have a budget for sort of display, maybe look at what the KPIs are around that, because more and more we're seeing a need for awareness and branding, and perhaps then that's something that could be utilised.
So you mentioned integration being important as well. Yeah. So I know we only said one more thing, but what's your key takeaway on integration? How should people play that with paid for?
I think it's really important, because if you're working alone, you're a one-man band, or say you're producing this content which is going onto social media, you're not necessarily thinking about the paid side of stuff. And whilst we talked about perhaps dabbling, you might have expertise that you're not utilising either with a sister agency or with other agencies that you're working with. So if it's something that you're interested in, I would say integrate, look at their plans, look at what they're doing, and also look at their skill set and what could potentially be used to really benefit your campaign and really benefit your KPIs.
So guys, that was just meant to give you a flavour of what we've discussed today. We're by no means professional presenters, and this isn't chapter and verse on what you should do on paid for social media or paid for content. This is just to give you a flavor of what was discussed today, and to just open the channel to say if you have any questions or comments, or you want to share tips and experiences with paid for social, we'd be massively appreciative of that and would love the engagement. So yeah, we'll put this out there and let us know what you think. Cheers.
Thanks.